Oh man, I am in such an incredibly good mood today. I just had the absolute best cup of coffee.
Oh yeah, from that new place down the street.
Yes, it completely jump-started my brain today. I am buzzing.
Nice. I'm basically running on pure adrenaline right now, honestly.
Good, because you're really going to need it for today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter what time zone you are in. I am Sunny. Today's information volume is absolutely insane, from the drastic political upheaval in the Middle East to the legal trial of influencer Johnny Somali in South Korea.
Yeah, we've talked about how awful his behavior is before.
Exactly. And even stretching all the way to the clone rumors of Hollywood giant Jim Carrey. This is a huge combo platter.
It really is. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Sip&Talk. In 2026, under the leadership of Trump, the global political and economic situation is undergoing drastic changes. Today, we are not just watching the show.
Definitely not just watching.
Right, but practicing independent thinking from an international perspective to dismantle the truth and structure behind these events. We will primarily explore what the Middle East regime shakeup means for the world, and then finish off with two lighter news items to let everyone relax a bit.
And before we jump into this absolute whirlwind of a combo platter, I want to set a quick ground rule for all the Sip&Talkers out there listening. We are dealing with some highly charged political events today, especially regarding the U.S. and the Middle East.
Right, very charged.
So we want to make it crystal clear that we are just impartially looking at the facts. We aren't endorsing any specific political viewpoints, left-wing or right-wing. Our mission today is just to look at the structures, the actions, and the consequences.
That's a crucial baseline to set. When dealing with geopolitics, emotion often clouds analysis. Our goal is to pierce through that cloud.
Okay, let's get right into the absolute earthquake that just hit the geopolitical landscape. February 28th, 2026. This is a date that, well, it's going to be written into the history books, analyzed in military academies, debated forever. We are talking about Operation Epic Fury.
It's massive.
It is. Now, I have looked at the events, but the sheer scale of this is just hard to wrap my head around. What exactly makes this operation so historically unprecedented?
What makes it unprecedented is really the synchronized, multi-layered nature of the assault.
Yeah.
This is a joint United States and Israeli military operation. In modern warfare, we're mostly used to seeing surgical strikes.
Like a drone taking out a specific rogue general.
Exactly. Or maybe a cruise missile destroying a single weapons cache.
Yeah.
Operation Epic Fury was fundamentally different. It was designed to dismantle an entire nation's strategic capability in a matter of hours.
Hours? That's wild.
Yeah. The targets included the deeply entrenched nuclear facilities, specifically places like Natanz and Fordow.
I want to pause you right there because I always hear those names thrown around on the news. Natanz and Fordow. For a Sip&Talker who doesn't have a degree in Middle Eastern military geography, why are those two specific facilities so critical?
Excellent question. Natanz is essentially the heart of Iran's uranium enrichment program. It's this massive facility, largely underground, designed to spin centrifuges that purify uranium.
Okay. And Fordow?
Fordow is even more extreme. It is built deep inside a mountain to protect it from airstrikes. By targeting these two specific locations, the operation wasn't just sending a message.
It was physically erasing the capability.
Exactly. Attempting to physically erase the regime's capability to reach a nuclear breakout. But they didn't stop there. They also targeted major ballistic missile bases, vital naval assets in the Persian Gulf.
To neutralize any immediate maritime retaliation, I'm guessing.
Spot on. And, most critically, they hit the primary leadership compound in Tehran.
And the outcome of that strike on the leadership compound is what has the entire globe holding its breath right now. We saw the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, deliver that national address.
Very intense lighting.
Very stark. His demeanor was incredibly intense, and he strongly indicated that the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, along with over 40 of the highest-ranking military and political elites of the regime, have been eliminated.
All at once.
40 top officials. They are calling this the largest decapitation operation in modern warfare history.
To truly understand the magnitude of this, you have to look at the anatomy of the strike and the intelligence behind it. When Netanyahu gave that speech, word on the street within the Israeli government leaked that they had visual confirmation.
Like actual footage.
Yes, we are talking about drone footage, satellite telemetry, and potentially even human intelligence photos from the rubble confirming the supreme leader's demise.
But there is always a tiny margin of doubt in global intelligence, right?
Yeah.
I mean, could it be a body double? Could he have slipped out a back door into some deeper tunnel?
There's always a theoretical margin of doubt, sure. However, For a sitting prime minister to go on national television and stake his entire political reputation and, frankly, the strategic posture of his nation on this singular claim,
Right.
it implies a level of certainty that is staggering.
You don't make that announcement unless you are 99.9% sure.
Right.
This brings me to the biggest question I had while prepping for today's Sip and Talk. How in the world do you get 40 of the most paranoid, heavily guarded, secretive men on the planet, the entire upper echelon of a hostile regime, into one room at the exact same time?
It seems impossible.
Right. These are men who know they are constantly being hunted. They usually communicate through highly secured, decentralized channels, or they meet face-to-face in isolated, constantly rotating locations. How did this happen?
That is the central mystery that military analysts are currently dubbing the negotiation trap theory. To understand how the bait was set, we have to rewind our timeline back to January of 2026. For over a month, there had been ongoing, highly publicized negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. And these weren't happening in Washington or Tehran. They were happening through diplomatic back channels in Oman.
I remember those talks. The Omani foreign minister was giving press conferences, expressing all this optimism about a peaceful resolution.
Yes.
There was even talk of a fourth round of negotiations moving to Geneva. It all looked like a massive diplomatic breakthrough was right on the horizon.
And that, according to the current structural analysis, was the grand illusion. The trap was set using the prospect of survival. In order to make critical, regime-altering decisions about whether to accept stringent U.S. conditions, freeze their nuclear program, or try to bluff their way out, the highest-ranking officials couldn't just hop on a secure Zoom call.
Why not, though? With modern encryption, wouldn't a virtual meeting be safer than gathering physically?
Because of trust, and really the nature of autocratic power. When you are deciding the ultimate fate of a nation's nuclear program and the very survival strategy of the regime, you cannot trust digital transmission, no matter how encrypted it is. The fear of interception is too high.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, in these highly centralized power structures, looking the supreme leader in the eye when making a definitive choice is a requirement of loyalty. You have to gather the decision makers in person.
So it's essentially the ultimate mob movie scenario.
Exactly.
You set up a grand peace meeting to settle differences, but it turns out to be an elaborate ruse to get all the rival bosses in one single room so you can take them all out at once. But instead of guys in suits at an Italian restaurant, it's played out with stealth bombers, AI targeting systems, and bunker buster munitions.
That is a very apt comparison. The psychological mechanism is exactly the same, leveraging the promise of a truce to create a vulnerability. And the technical details of the strike we are seeing support this theory perfectly.
Classic.
Well, the Iranian supreme leader has access to multiple levels of underground bunkers. The deepest ones, sometimes referred to metaphorically as the 18th level of hell, are incredibly deep. They're so fortified that they require specialized, massive munitions, like the U.S. B-2 stealth bomber dropping massive ordnance penetrators, just to scratch the surface.
But wait, if they have bunkers that deep, why wouldn't they hold this massive, crucial meeting down there? Why take the risk?
This is where human comfort and hubris come into play. The deepest bunkers are Spartan. They are designed to survive a nuclear blast, not to host a massive multi-day diplomatic strategy session with 40 top officials and all their aides.
Oh, I see.
The location that was actually struck was a slightly shallower bunker within the main compound. It had slightly thinner armor, but it had the communication suites, the conference rooms, the plush chairs, the infrastructure to actually host a gathering of that size comfortably.
So they felt secure enough in this secondary bunker because they thought they were engaged in good faith negotiations. They didn't think they were in imminent, unavoidable danger.
Exactly. And because they were in a slightly less fortified bunker, Israel was able to execute the strike using their own advanced bunker buster bombs. They didn't even need the heavy lift of the U.S. B-2 bombers.
Wow.
Satellite imagery that has been released shows 3 incredibly precise entry holes from the munitions going straight into the command center. This is not a carpet bombing campaign that leveled a city block. It was a microscopic incision.
They lured them out of the absolute deepest hiding spots with the promise of diplomatic leverage. That is chilling.
Very.
Now, we have to talk about Trump's role in this because his public address announcing the strike was a massive departure from his usual style. Usually his speeches are full of expansive gestures, a certain level of showmanship, and off-the-cuff remarks. But everyone noted a completely different posture here.
It was a very calculated shift in demeanor. He was wearing a hat pulled low, his eyes were barely visible, and there were no exaggerated movements. He barely lifted his hands from the podium. It was an incredibly stoic, solemn delivery.
What does that shift in body language tell us about the situation?
It communicates absolute gravity and finality. When a leader strips away all their usual rhetorical flourishes, they are signaling that the action taken is too severe for political theater. When we analyze the rationale he laid out in that speech, it rests on three very distinct pillars.
Okay, let's break those down.
The first pillar is what analysts are calling the nuclear red line.
What exactly is the red line in this specific context?
Back in 2025, there were limited strikes against Iranian facilities, meant to serve as a warning. But instead of backing down or returning to the negotiating table in good faith, the regime actually accelerated their uranium enrichment.
They doubled down.
Exactly. They crossed an invisible, highly classified line where the threat of them acquiring a functional nuclear weapon became too imminent to manage through economic sanctions or diplomatic warnings alone.
So the administration essentially decided that the time for warnings had expired. What was the second pillar?
The second pillar was the public acknowledgement of the trap itself. Trump actually mocked the regime's leadership for their hubris. The regime genuinely believed they were playing the United States at the negotiating table, dragging out talks in Oman to buy crucial time for their nuclear scientists to finish their work.
Basically saying, you thought you were playing chess, but we were just waiting for you to sit at the board so we could flip it over.
That's the essence of it.
Yeah.
While the regime was meticulously reviewing diplomatic proposals and debating treaty clauses, the U.S. and Israeli intelligence services were quietly locking in their GPS coordinates.
Brutal.
And the third pillar of his speech is arguably the most important for understanding future geopolitical moves. It was a stark demonstration of pure realism.
How so? Because usually when the U.S. gets involved in the Middle East, there is a lot of talk about spreading freedom or liberating the people.
That is the traditional neoconservative approach, often referred to as nation building. Trump was very explicit in his address that this operation was the exact opposite of that. He stated clearly that the United States is not in the business of exporting democracy or occupying a foreign country to force a cultural shift.
So what was the goal?
The objective was purely kinetic and defensive, eliminating a direct existential threat to the U.S. and its regional allies. They removed the leadership, they destroyed the military capability, and that was the absolute extent of the mission parameter. There are no U.S. boots on the ground trying to set up a new parliament.
The irony of the regime's internal politics leading up to this is just wild to me. We've seen reports from just a few weeks ago detailing how Khamenei had been acting incredibly paranoid after the 2025 strikes. To protect the regime, he had actually designated a long, cascading line of successors.
Yes, the chain of succession strategy is a very common tactic in authoritarian regimes to ensure the continuity of government in the event of an assassination. It is designed to project stability.
But what is the fatal flaw in that strategy if you gather everyone in one place? You designate a successor, and the successor's successor, and the head of the military, and the head of the intelligence apparatus, and then you invite literally all of them to the exact same meeting. It completely nullifies the entire point of having a backup plan.
It really highlights a massive structural vulnerability in autocratic regimes, which is something we are going to dive into deeply in a moment. But first, we need to look at how the rest of the world reacted to this sudden, massive power vacuum.
Right.
Because historically, when 40 top officials of a major oil-producing nation vanish in an instant, the global markets usually go into absolute freefall.
I really want you to explain this to me like I'm 5, because the market reaction is where this story gets totally counterintuitive. You would think the stock market would crash, oil would shoot to $200 a barrel, and people will be panic buying gold and canned goods. Let's look at Bitcoin, for example.
Okay, let's look at Bitcoin.
The exact minute the news of Operation Epic Fury broke, Bitcoin immediately dropped by about $1,000. That makes total sense to me. Geopolitical panic hits, people liquidate volatile assets. But then it completely reversed.
Rapidly.
Within hours, it rapidly recovered and actually surpassed its previous price before the strike. Why?
To understand this, we have to talk about what financial analysts call the smart money and the difference between algorithmic trading and human analysis.
Okay, stop right there. What exactly is algorithmic trading doing in those first 10 seconds of a crisis? Because I don't have a Wall Street terminal in my living room.
Think of algorithmic trading as millions of highly advanced computer programs that are constantly scanning global news feeds, social media, and financial data. They are programmed to react instantly to specific keywords.
Like robots just waiting for a signal?
Precisely. So the moment words like airstrike, Tehran, supreme leader, and missiles hit the wire, these algorithms don't stop to think about the political nuances. They are programmed with a simple rule. Middle East conflict equals instability, therefore instantly sell high-risk, volatile assets like Bitcoin and buy safe havens. This causes the immediate $1,000 plunge.
Okay, so the computers panic first, but then what causes the recovery?
That is when the human analysts, the smart money, step in. They look at the board, they assess the variables, and they realize the algorithms overreacted. They start placing calculated bets. The rapid recovery of Bitcoin tells us something incredibly revealing about how the global financial elite view this strike.
I'm trying to guess here. Does it mean they think the war is already over?
Precisely. It signals that the global market does not expect a drawn-out, messy, multi-year conflict. More importantly, they do not expect the Strait of Hormuz to be blockaded.
Just to give our Sip&Talkers some geographical context, the Strait of Hormuz is the narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. It's essentially the choke point for a massive percentage of the world's daily oil supply, right?
Exactly. If the market truly believed we were entering a prolonged regional bloodbath, or that Iran had the capability to mine the strait and shut down global oil shipments, risk assets like Bitcoin would stay down, and traditional safe havens like gold would go parabolic. They would skyrocket.
But gold only saw a modest rise. There was no extreme panic-induced spike. It just bumped up a little and stabilized.
Because the market analyzed the decapitation strike and came to a cold, rational conclusion. The regime is gone. The central command structure is entirely shattered. Therefore, the Iranian military cannot mount a prolonged, coordinated retaliation.
They just don't have the organization left.
Right. The market is betting on the fact that a quick surgical collapse of the regime will actually remove a major source of friction and lead to long-term stability in the Middle East. They are pricing in prosperous times ahead rather than an era of chaos.
The market looked at the biggest assassination in modern history and priced it in as a bullish indicator for global stability. That is the absolute definition of cold, hard capitalism.
It really is.
But it's not like the regime's military apparatus just disappeared quietly into the night without firing a single shot. There was some chaos in the immediate aftermath, and it led to a colossal geopolitical blunder.
You are referring to the stray munitions incident, which has massive implications for regional diplomacy. In the confusion following the complete communications blackout from Tehran, local commanders in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps likely fell back on pre-programmed orders, or they simply panicked.
Just firing blindly.
Essentially, they fired off a barrage of drones and missiles, aiming at what they perceived to be Allied bases in the region. But without central guidance, the targeting was severely compromised.
Compromise is putting it mildly. One of these stray Iranian drones or missiles ended up hitting Dubai. And not just empty desert on the outskirts of Dubai, but a highly affluent, wealthy district right near the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. What does it mean for a stray missile to hit there?
From a diplomatic and strategic standpoint, it is an unmitigated disaster for Iran. You have to understand the incredibly delicate balance of power in the Gulf. The United Arab Emirates, where Dubai is located, and Saudi Arabia have complex, often tense relationships with Iran.
Right.
But for years, they have generally tried to maintain a functional, if cold, diplomatic distance. They want to protect their own massive economic interests, their tourism, and their foreign investment. Dubai is an international hub of commerce. It relies entirely on the perception of safety.
So hitting Dubai is like knocking over the biggest hornet's nest in the global economy.
Exactly. By hitting that specific district, Iran instantly alienated the UAE and Saudi Arabia completely. Any lingering tolerance, any hesitation those Gulf states might have had about the U.S.-Israel strike evaporated instantly.
They lost any goodwill they might have had left.
The Saudis issued a very clear, stern warning that any further aggression, accidental or otherwise, would be met with severe military consequences. Iran achieved the worst possible outcome. They lost their military leadership, and they completely lost any shred of regional sympathy. They ensured their own total, undeniable isolation. The reality on the ground in Tehran was unfolding in a way that truly shocked a lot of international observers.
Shocked is the right word. If you were just a casual observer of global news, you would think that after a country's supreme leader and entire top brass are killed in a foreign airstrike, the capital city would be in deep mourning. You would expect massive weeping crowds, chest beating, flags at half-mast, absolute national sorrow, but the scenes coming out of Tehran, they were completely surreal.
We saw widespread footage of citizens setting off fireworks. People were dancing in the streets, honking their car horns in celebration, and openly shouting slogans like, "I love Trump" and "Farewell Khamenei."
Okay, I need you to give us the historical context here. Why are they celebrating the bombing of their own capital? To anyone just tuning in, seeing people cheer for a foreign airstrike on their own soil seems completely backwards. Doesn't nationalism usually kick in during a moment like this?
Normally, yes. But to understand the dancing, you have to understand the depth of the trauma these people have endured. This isn't just a population experiencing a political disagreement with their leadership. This is a population that has been held hostage by its own government for decades.
Right.
We have to look back to the Mahsa Amini protests in 2022.
I remember those. They were sparked by the morality police, right?
Yes, Mahsa Amini was killed in police custody for allegedly violating the strict dress code. The protests that followed were brutally crushed. Women and young people were beaten, blinded with shotgun pellets, and killed in the streets simply for demanding basic bodily autonomy and human rights.
Awful.
And it didn't stop there. Just recently, in January 2026, there was another massive wave of protests driven by economic despair and political oppression.
And the regime's response to that January 2026 protest was horrifying. Reports say they killed approximately 20,000 people. 20,000 of their own citizens.
When a government massacres 20,000 of its own people to maintain a grip on power, it fundamentally alters the social contract. It ceases to be a government in the eyes of the populace and becomes an occupying force. So when the Iranian people heard the explosions and realized the leadership compound was destroyed, they didn't see an attack on their sovereign nation.
They saw the destruction of the warden's office.
Exactly. To them, the falling bombs look like the destruction of their prison walls.
The warden's office is gone. That is an incredibly powerful way to put it. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating analytical points we can draw from this entire event. The fundamental difference between how a dictatorship reacts to a crisis like this versus how a democracy would. You mentioned a tech analogy earlier about a single point of failure. Can you detail that operating system analogy for us? How does a dictatorship brick like an old computer?
It perfectly encapsulates why the Iranian military and bureaucratic regime froze after the strike. Think of a highly centralized, top-down dictatorship as an old, monolithic computer operating system. In this system, the supreme leader is the kernel.
Okay, for the non-tech folks out there, the kernel is like the absolute core brain of the computer, right?
Correct. The kernel has complete overriding control over everything in the system. It dictates memory allocation, hardware communication, everything. In an autocracy, every significant decision, every military promotion, every strategic order flows directly from that top kernel. There is no independent judiciary to interpret laws and no autonomous military command that can act without direct approval.
So if you are running an old computer and the kernel panics or gets corrupted, the entire machine gets bricked, the screen goes blue, the mouse stops working, nothing functions.
Exactly. When Khamenei and the top 40 officials are vaporized in an instant, the bureaucrats, the regional governors, and the local military commanders left behind literally freeze. They do not act because they don't know who to take orders from.
And they're probably terrified to make the wrong move.
Precisely. If they guess wrong, if they back a successor who ends up losing a power struggle, they could be executed for treason. So the safest bet for personal survival is complete paralysis. The system bricks itself.
I want to play devil's advocate here for a second. Doesn't a sudden power vacuum like that usually just invite an immediate bloody power struggle, like a civil war between the remaining generals? Why the paralysis instead of chaos?
A power struggle usually occurs when there are surviving factions with relatively equal power. But Operation Epic Fury was so comprehensive that it didn't just take out the leader, it took out the heads of all the competing factions simultaneously. There was no one left with enough consolidated authority to even start a civil war.
Wow. Okay, so if an autocracy bricks like an old computer, how does a democracy avoid that same single point of failure? If, God forbid, the United States suffered a catastrophic strike on its leadership, what happens to our operating system?
A constitutional democracy operates much more like a modern, decentralized cloud computing network. If one node goes offline, even the most important node, like the president, the system is designed from the ground up with built-in redundancies. If the president is incapacitated, the 25th Amendment of the Constitution automatically and instantly shifts executive power to the vice president.
And if the vice president is gone?
It goes to the Speaker of the House, then the president pro tempore of the Senate, and then down a long legally established line of succession through the cabinet secretaries.
The machine doesn't brick. It just reroutes the data to the next available server and keeps running.
Precisely. The military knows exactly who to salute, because the chain of command is enshrined in law, not personal loyalty. The courts remain open. The financial institutions hold. Power is derived from the Constitution, not from a single individual's personality cult. The single point of failure is engineered completely out of the system.
And this inherent vulnerability in dictatorships, this realization of the single point of failure, is exactly why another major global superpower is reportedly sweating profusely right now. Let's pivot our international lens to China. The leadership in Beijing is watching these fireworks in Tehran. They are watching this decapitation strike, and word is they are extremely nervous.
They have every reason to be deeply concerned. On a superficial economic level, they were worried about energy security. Iran is a major oil supplier to China, and they are a key geographical node in Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. But the real fear in the halls of power in Beijing runs much, much deeper than oil shipments.
It's the technology, isn't it? The sheer terrifying demonstration of what advanced Western militaries can actually execute.
It is the live demonstration of advanced AI tracking, impenetrable stealth technology, and most importantly, the replicability of a precision decapitation strike. Beijing operates a highly centralized, top-down government, much like the OS kernel we just described.
Right.
They're watching this strike and realizing that if push came to shove in a major existential conflict, say over Taiwan or the South China Sea, the United States possesses the capability to theoretically bypass traditional battlefields entirely.
Meaning they don't have to fight a million soldiers on the ground. They can strike directly at the core leadership.
Exactly. It forces authoritarian regimes to ask themselves a terrifying question. Is our massive security apparatus actually protecting us from foreign adversaries? Or is it just keeping our own domestic population in check?
That's a scary realization for them.
Because against a peer-level technological adversary, the traditional methods of keeping a dictator safe, deep bunkers, thousands of bodyguards, secret locations, are suddenly obsolete. An AI-guided munition can find exactly which room you were sitting in, and there is no air defense system capable of stopping a stealth bomber you can't even see on radar. It completely changes the calculus of global power dynamics.
Okay, Sip&Talkers, we have covered a massive amount of ground today on the geopolitical front. From world-altering military operations and the collapse of regimes, to global market psychology and the fundamental differences in human governance. It is a lot to digest.
It really is.
So we are going to pivot the combo platter. We are shifting from how technology tracks and eliminates world leaders to how technology creates fake realities that ruin lives. We are moving from international warfare to international karma. Let's dive into the legal fate of infamous influencer Johnny Somali.
Yes, moving from the macro level of state actors to the micro level of individual digital footprint, though this story certainly has its own complex international dimensions. Johnny Somali, whose real name is Ramzi Khalid Ismail, has been a notorious figure on the internet for years. He essentially made a lucrative career out of being a professional nuisance in foreign countries.
Professional nuisance is putting it incredibly politely. For the Sip&Talkers, who might be lucky enough to have avoided his content until now, this guy travels to different countries. He was in Japan, he went to Israel, and now South Korea, and basically acts as abhorrently as possible just to generate views and outrage. Harassing locals on trains, being incredibly disrespectful to cultural monuments, playing loud, offensive audio on public transport, just a completely toxic presence.
Yeah, his behavior is really beyond the pale.
But it seems his arrogance has finally decisively caught up with him in South Korea.
It absolutely has. He is currently facing a major criminal trial in Seoul, and the prosecution is not holding back whatsoever. He is facing 8 distinct charges. While some of these involve his standard operating procedure of public disturbance, trespassing, and obstruction of business, there are 2 specific charges that elevate this from a misdemeanor annoyance to severe, life-altering felony territory.
This is where the story gets really dark and, frankly, disturbing. He's being charged with creating and distributing non-consensual, obscene deepfake videos.
This is a critical point that requires context. South Korea is currently battling a massive, nationwide epidemic of deepfake pornography. This is where perpetrators use sophisticated AI software to map the faces of unconsenting women, often classmates, colleagues, or celebrities, onto explicit material.
It's awful.
It has caused a national outrage, and the South Korean government and judiciary are treating these crimes with the utmost severity to set a precedent.
So when Johnny Somali decided to use his platform to create and distribute these deepfakes targeting individuals in Korea, he didn't just cross a line of bad taste. He walked straight into a legal buzzsaw that the country was actively sharpening.
Precisely. The prosecution is demanding 3 years in prison, forced labor, and mandatory sex offender registration. 3 years of forced labor in a South Korean prison is a far cry from getting a slap on the wrist, spending a night in a holding cell, and being deported, which is what usually happens to these clout-chasing influencers when they act out.
And his behavior in the courtroom practically guaranteed that the judge would have absolutely zero sympathy for him. Instead of showing remorse or apologizing, he attempted a defense that was both legally absurd and deeply culturally offensive. He tried to blame his actions on not understanding Korean culture.
As if one needs a cultural guidebook to know that fabricating explicit pornography of real people without their consent is a violation of human rights.
Right.
It's not a cultural misunderstanding. It is a universal crime recognized across the developed world.
And didn't he also verbally attack his victims right there in the courtroom?
He did. He showed a complete lack of decorum or respect for the judicial process, lashing out at the victims who were bravely testifying against him. This completely disgusted the judge.
I can't even imagine.
In any legal system, but particularly in South Korea where respect for the court is paramount, showing contempt and attacking victims during your own sentencing is the fastest, most efficient way to ensure you receive the maximum possible penalty.
It is the ultimate embodiment of FAFO-F around and find out. You know, it's like being a terrible guest in someone else's house. You can spill a little wine on the rug and maybe the host just politely asks you to leave. But if you start setting the furniture on fire and insulting their family, they're going to lock the doors and call the police.
And he definitely set the furniture on fire.
Big time.
That is an excellent analogy. But the consequences for him extend far beyond the borders of South Korea. This is where the American legal implications come into play, creating a severe legal domino effect.
Whoa.
I know this sounds complicated, so let me break it down.
Please do.
Johnny Somali is a United States citizen. Under U.S. federal law, a sex crime conviction in a foreign country has severe domestic consequences.
Wait, I need clarification on this. How does a crime committed in Seoul put you in jeopardy with the federal government back in the United States? Can't he just serve his time in Korea, fly back to the U.S., and pretend it never happened?
Absolutely not. The United States has laws related to international travel and sex offenses, specifically Megan's Law and the International Megan's Law, or IML, because of the specific nature of the deepfake charges, which are classified as severe sex crimes in South Korea. Upon returning to the United States, he will likely be mandated to register as a sex offender under U.S. federal law.
That is massive. So his digital footprint abroad literally follows him to his physical address at home.
Exactly. And the enforcement is incredibly strict. If he attempts to evade this registration, or if he fails to comply with the rigorous reporting requirements upon re-entry, like notifying local law enforcement of his address, his online aliases, his travel plans, he faces severe federal penalties. We're talking about up to 10 years in federal prison just for failing to register.
Wow, 10 years in federal prison just for trying to hide a crime he committed overseas. His influencer career is effectively over. No brand will touch him, platforms will ban him, and he will carry this label for the rest of his life. He traded his entire future for some cheap shock value and internet clicks. It is a stunning display of short-sightedness.
It highlights a broader societal issue regarding digital consequences. There is a whole generation of content creators who operate under the delusion that because their actions exist primarily on screens and social media feeds, the real-world consequences are somehow mitigated, delayed, or entirely non-existent.
That's a dangerous mindset.
The legal system is finally catching up to the technology. Authorities are making an example out of cases like this to establish a firm, undeniable boundary. Digital harassment is real harassment, and the penalties are tangible.
Speaking of the blurry boundaries between the real world, digital screens, and fake realities, let's move to our final bizarre news item of the day. We're transitioning from international courts to Hollywood conspiracies, from digital deepfakes to physical clones. We have to talk about Jim Carrey's recent appearance at the César Awards in Paris, which sent the internet into an absolute conspiracy frenzy.
The world of celebrity observation is always ripe for wild speculation, but this particular event really captured the collective imagination of the internet. Jim Carrey attended the César Awards, which, for those unfamiliar, is essentially the French equivalent of the Oscars. It's a highly prestigious event.
Yeah.
And almost immediately, social media platforms were flooded with side-by-side photo comparisons and hyper-analyzed video clips of his appearance.
The internet sleuths were out in full force. The main claims were that his eye color had seemingly changed overnight from its natural dark brown to a clear, piercing blue.
Right.
They also pointed out that his facial expressions, which he is obviously world famous for, the man built a legendary comedy career on having a face made of rubber, were suddenly incredibly stiff and mechanical. His movements didn't seem fluid, so naturally the internet jumped past all logical explanations to the most sci-fi conclusion possible. Jim Carrey has been replaced by a clone or an animatronic body double.
The clone theory is a recurring, almost comforting motif in pop culture. We have seen it applied to everyone, from musicians like Paul McCartney and Avril Lavigne to various politicians. But let's apply some rational analysis here and separate science fiction from biological reality. When you observe someone's appearance changing drastically, especially a public figure in the entertainment industry, the most probable explanations are usually the most mundane.
Right, let's debunk this step by step. What are we actually looking at when we see a stiff, mechanical-looking celebrity on the red carpet?
It is highly likely that what people are observing is the result of recent cosmetic procedures. Botox, which is a neurotoxin, and various dermal fillers are incredibly common in Hollywood. These treatments work by temporarily paralyzing or altering the movement of specific facial muscles to smooth out wrinkles. If these procedures were done very recently before the event and have it fully settled into the tissue, it would entirely explain the stiff mechanical facial movements that people are pointing out.
Okay, so he probably just got some Botox that was a bit too fresh for the red carpet. What about the eyes?
The eyes are easily explained by a combination of factors. First, colored contact lenses are frequently used by actors to change their look for a specific event or to match a wardrobe choice. Second, the incredibly harsh directional lighting at award shows, combined with the intense flash photography from hundreds of cameras, can drastically alter how a person's features appear on high-definition video. Add the natural, inevitable process of aging, and you have a recipe for someone looking drastically different than they did in a movie from 20 years ago.
So it's just dermatology, optometry, and lighting. But what makes this conspiracy theory so sticky? Why are people so eager to believe that Jim Carrey specifically was replaced by a clone? I think it has a lot to do with his own real-life philosophy recently.
That is the truly fascinating psychological layer to this story. Over the last several years, Jim Carrey has undergone a very public, very intense spiritual and philosophical evolution. He has largely retreated from the traditional Hollywood machine. He spends most of his time painting in his studio, and when he does occasionally give interviews, he speaks extensively about existentialism, the illusion of reality, and the concept of ego death.
Yes. Sip&Talkers, if you haven't seen them, you have to look up his recent red carpet interviews. He has literally walked up to reporters at fashion events and given these wildly profound, almost nihilistic speeches where he tells them directly, Jim Carrey doesn't exist.
Right.
He talks about how the concept of a personality is just a construct, an avatar we wear to navigate the world, and that he has successfully detached himself from that ego.
When an actor of his stature spends years publicly deconstructing their own identity, explicitly stating that their public persona is a hollow illusion, it inadvertently provides the perfect philosophical fodder for conspiracy theorists. The public takes his metaphorical spiritual detachment, his attempt to transcend the Hollywood ego, and interprets it literally. He says he doesn't exist anymore, therefore the person standing in front of us must be a fake.
I love the irony of that. If you tell people you don't exist for long enough in pursuit of spiritual enlightenment, the internet will eventually just agree with you and decide you've been replaced by a robot. It's the ultimate unintended consequence of seeking inner peace in the public eye.
It really is a testament to how human beings naturally seek patterns and narrative. We want a grand story, even when the truth is just biology and cosmetic dermatology. We prefer the sci-fi thriller explanation over the mundane, somewhat depressing reality of aging in an industry obsessed with youth.
Okay, Sip&Talkers, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. From the absolute pinnacle of global military strategy and the decapitation of autocracies, to the swift international hand of justice for obnoxious influencers, down to the existential crises and cosmetic realities of comedy legends.
Let's bring this full circle and return to the core mission we set out at the beginning of today's Sip and Talk. Whether we are analyzing the geopolitical shockwaves of an international warfare event like Operation Epic Fury, dissecting the legal precedents set by a deepfake trial in Seoul, or just laughing at Hollywood clone gossip, the underlying theme remains exactly the same: the absolute necessity of independent thinking.
You really have to look beyond the immediate sensational headlines and understand the broader structures at play. Why did the financial market react the way it did to a massive assassination? How does an autocratic system actually function or fail to function under extreme pressure? What are the real-world long-term consequences of living your entire life for digital clout? Asking these deeper questions is how you avoid being swept away by the initial panic, the algorithms, or the memes.
And providing that critical perspective, that deeper context, is exactly what we aim to do here. Knowledge is most valuable when you can connect the seemingly disparate dots and apply it to the bigger picture of how the world actually operates.
If you found today's conversation valuable, if it made you think differently about the world, please hit that subscribe button for the Sip and Talk podcast. We rely on your support to keep bringing you these in-depth, independent conversations. And before we go, we have to give a massive, enthusiastic shout-out to our very good friend, Mickey.
Oh yeah, Mickey is the best.
He is an absolute legend, and you all need to go subscribe to his YouTube channel right now. It's called Mickey to Life. Mickey posts the most hilarious memes. He does top-tier liquor tasting reviews that are incredibly detailed, and his travel vlogs are just awesome. Go check out Mickey to Life. You will not regret it.
It is a fantastic channel, highly recommended. Now, to leave our listeners with something to chew on. Throughout today's disparate discussions, a recurring thread has been the intersection of advancing technology and our perception of reality.
Give us the final provocative thought to take into the rest of the week.
Consider this. If military technology has advanced to the point where the most heavily guarded world leaders can be tracked by AI and eliminated with absolute precision and zero warning, and simultaneously everyday influencers can generate hyper-realistic, life-ruining deepfakes directly from their smartphones, are we entering an era where the biggest threat to humanity isn't traditional armies, but simply a fundamental lack of authenticity? If we can no longer trust the faces we see on our screens, the videos we watch, or even the security of our deepest physical fortresses, how do we navigate the future?
Wow, that is definitely something to mull over with your morning coffee. Thank you all for tuning in, Sip and Talkers. We will see you on the next episode.
See you next time.